Welcome back, everyone. Now, I know you're looking at the title and scratching your head. Well, I'm just gonna come out of the gate defensive. I know in the last video I said we have all we need so we can start building sentences, but although we have learned the basics of many different areas, there's still a lot of cracks that we've missed. So before we go into a sentence marathon, we're gonna go through and try to putty up all those cracks so that your language foundation is strong enough to build upon. Since this video by definition is meant to cover many different topics, I'll add some timestamps to the description so you can jump around. Now then, the first thing I want to cover is colors. Now you might think this is too simple or not worth really focusing on, but you would not imagine how important this is, especially when starting out. For instance, when you don't know the word for something, simply describing it could get you through the speed bump in the conversation. And yes, color is a big part of that. Well, thankfully, we just got finished going through adjectives, and that's exactly what colors are, so let's get into it. Almost all colors are adjectives, not adjectives, and nouns at the same time, with slight changes here and there. For example, akai is the most common way to say red, and it's obviously an adjective. But when you drop the it just becomes a simple form of the noun for red, because it also exists as a concept, not just to describe another thing. An easy way to remember this one is that the kanji for red is also a portion of the kanji for love, koi. The bottom part is actually the kanji for heart. Now hold on just one second. Before somebody corrects me, this kanji here is used for love in the sense of like new love or crush. For more deep love you would use ai, and if you notice in the middle there's another heart hiding in there. Anyway, back to the video. Interestingly, this kanji is also used as a piece of other words, such as me, akage, redhead, or red hair specifically. I mentioned colors are also na adjectives, right? Well, to make this you need to add the kanji iro, and believe it or not, this is the kanji that just means color. Akairo is the na adjective, but also the noun. This pattern applies to almost every color, with some changes here and there. So let's go down the list. Kiiro is the word for yellow. Now to remember this, you can think of the Japanese beer company Kirin. Beer is usually yellow, and so is Kirin's competitor, Asahi's headquarters in Tokyo. If you aren't much of a drinker, you can think of the word giraffe. The word for this in Japanese is also kirin. Now I wrote that word in kanji, but if there's ever a word you're going to ignore the kanji for, this one would be it. It's almost never written in kanji. Okay, side note, I know I'm getting distracted a lot in this series, but before I finish this video, my wife actually told me that this kanji in Chinese means unicorn. When Japan and Korea incorporated Old Chinese into their language, this was just a mistranslation. The best part of this is that in actual Chinese, the word for giraffe is long neck deer. And that is just awesome. But anyway, back to yellow. You will notice that this time I didn't start with the adjective, and that's because for yellow, it's just not the most common way to say it. Even so, there is an adjective form, kiiroi. This might sound weird and inconsistent, but think about it. The root of yellow is ki, so you can't just say ki. If your response to this is, well then why did they make the root ki? Dude, this language has roots 3,000 years ago. It's too late to complain now. Let's move on to another example. Aoi. This is the current version of blue. A way to remember this is that the bottom portion of this kanji is the kanji for moon, and there's a beer company called Blue Moon. Man, I should really probably stop drinking. Now, I said current version of blue because this kanji also used to mean green, and can still sometimes mean green in certain situations. Like when I was driving once, and someone told me to go because the light was blue, and I just stared at them confused until the person behind me honked at me. I don't know, maybe ancient Japanese people were colorblind? The current and real way to say green is midori, and as you guessed it, the noun way to say this would be midori-iro. As for remembering this color, if you're a fan of Japanese anime, you're probably already vaguely familiar with this word, since all writers seem to have lost all sense of creativity when naming characters with green hair. Midoriya, Midorikawa, Midori whatever this guy's name is. The word midori also means greenery, as in plants, trees, garden, stuff like that. Next is gray, which is hairo. This one is easy to remember because the kanji breakdown is ash color. Now if you're a smoker, the word haizara is ash dish, meaning ashtray. Alternatively, if the anime fans are still here, Haineko, Rangiku's sword from Bleach, means ash cat, which explains its power when it just kind of disappears. black and white would be kuroi and shiroi. Now to remember these, since we already mentioned cats, the Japanese shipping company Yamato is often called Kuroneko because their logo looks like a black cat. There's also this Kuroneko as well. As I mentioned, shiroi means white. To remember this, there's another shiroi, meaning castle. I don't know if the same image comes to mind for you as it does for me, but there's also plenty of colors that just borrow directly from English, like pink, orange. Those ones are easy, but the real kicker is the last one we're going to talk about, murasaki, which means purple. There really isn't a mnemonic for this one, so it took me a long time to get used to it, especially because I kept mixing it up with another word, mujaki, meaning innocence. Why would you tell them that? That's just gonna make them more confused. I don't know, I thought I turned out alright. Anyway, I don't know, maybe just think of sweet potatoes or something? I think there's a brand name called Murasaki. That pretty much covers colors. The next thing I wanted to cover was basic greetings and set phrases. Obviously, as all languages should, I'm going to start with manners. Everyone knows the word arigato. Everyone also knows that it means thank you, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. The full arigatou gozaimasu is written this way in kanji. However, it's almost never written this way. In my 5 years, I've only seen it once. However, the middle kanji is quite common. This is used as a prefix to make things more polite. This kanji is either pronounced go or o, and there is a pattern to this. If the word uses the kunyomi, meaning the Japanese pronunciation, this kanji is pronounced o. However, if it uses the onyomi, meaning the borrowed Chinese pronunciation, it's pronounced go. But, being Japanese, there are exceptions. Let's look at some examples. Obento, goryoshin, ohashi, odenwa. This is not the Japanese original pronunciation. This is from the Chinese dianhua. Now, not that you need to learn Chinese first to learn Japanese. You'll just get used to these as you go along. Continuing with manners, ohayou gozaimasu is a really polite way to say good morning. There are many other ways to say this, slipping more and more into slang territory. Ohayou, oha, ohaine. I really don't recommend that last one. Sorry, another side note. In old Japanese, adjectives used to end in o rather than e. So good morning is just derived from an adjective we learned in the previous video. Hayai, meaning early or fast. So if you convert it to old Japanese, hayai becomes haiyo, and then you add some politeness at the beginning, ohayo, and there you go, you have the modern way to say good morning. So breaking it down this way, good morning basically just means, it's early, huh? Okay, this video is already going to be long, ignoring the tangents, so let's just sprint through the rest of these. Konnichiwa, hello or good day. Konbanwa, good evening. If you wanted to say good night, you would say oyasumi nasai, or more casually, oyasumi sayonara, meaning goodbye. Now in the last episode, we actually already explained ja mata ne, which means see you later. Well, sayonara is a little bit more of a permanent or longer lasting goodbye. O genki desu ka? This one we already explained as well. It just means how are you or are you well. Choushi wa dou? Now this one also means how are you, but it's more of a casual way, so it kind of means like what's up. Chotto ii desu ka? Excuse me, do you have a moment? Or I have a question. If you receive a phone call, you would answer by saying moshi moshi, but you'd only do so if it was a friend or a family member. You can also say it to mean hello, as in like you lost connection or something. But if it's a work call, you would not say moshi moshi. You would probably say hai along with your company name or your name. Hajimemashite. This means nice to meet you. Now if you remember the verb video, you know why. Hajimaru and hajimeru mean to begin or to start. So this means nice to meet you, as in beginning our relationship. Going hand in hand with that, yoroshiku onegai shimasu. There are two things here. From the end, onegai shimasu just means please. And once again, there are plenty of levels of politeness here, but that's not important right now. The point is this part means please. So the core meaning of this phrase is yoroshiku. This one's hard to explain, but you might notice it looks a lot like the adjective yoroshii, meaning alright. So together, this phrase basically means please let's be all right together moving forward. I don't know, different cultures are kind of hard to translate. Speaking of hard to translate, the phrase ittekimasu is used when you leave the house. Literally means I will go and come back. But that sounds weird. More naturally, it means I'm heading out. In response, the people in the house would say ittarashai, which literally means please go and come back. Oh, these literal translations are going to be the death of me. It basically just means see you when you get back, or have a safe trip. Once that person does come back, they would say tadaima, meaning I'm home, and you would respond by saying okaeri nasai, or just okaeri, to mean welcome back. While we're at home, someone knocks on the door and says gomen kudasai, meaning is anyone home? You could respond by saying dochira-sama desu ka, who is it? Then you would welcome them inside by saying ohairi kudasai. They come inside, they would say ojama shimasu, basically meaning I'm sorry to trouble you. To say sorry in a more general way, you would say sumimasen. This also means excuse me, whether it be to get someone's attention or if someone's in your way in a crowd. Not the excuse me if you burp. That would be a different thing. You would say shitsure shimasu. This literally means I am impolite or I have failed my honor. More commonly, you would just say shitsure. A longer, more polite, and more sincere apology would be moshiwake nai. And just like before, there's many levels of politeness to this as well, but for now we're just going to stick to the basics. When she reviewed this, my wife insisted I add 2 more. It's weird that I forgot about them, but I feel like I only hear them like once a year. Akemashite omedetou gozaimasu means Happy New Year. But when people say this, they also will add kotoshi mo yoroshiku onegai shimasu. This set phrase uses the yoroshiku onegai shimasu that we learned earlier. It just adds kotoshi mo to the beginning. So this together would mean please treat me well this year also. Believe it or not, even Japanese people find these phrases way too long. So the short ways are akeome and kotoyoro. That about covers that. The last thing I wanted to cover in this filling in the blanks episode was numbers and counting. Now I know what you're thinking. Numbers can't be that complicated. Couldn't I just learn them with some kind of picture or something? Well, no. This is Japanese, everything is complicated. So for now, let's just start simple. Ichi, ni, san, shi, go, roku, shichi, hachi, kyu, ju, and rei. Some of these have different pronunciations depending on when and where they're used. There are simple examples of this, and then more complicated. Let's start simple. 4, or shi, is also read as yon. 7, or shichi, is also read as nana. 9, or kyu, is also read as ku. And finally, 0, or re, is also, and more commonly read the Western way, zero. But it's also read as maru, which just means circle. Get it? Now, when things get complicated is when you start counting. In Japanese, you have to add an additional character and that character's corresponding sound after the number, and it's different depending on what type of thing you're counting. Sometimes those sounds don't really mix very well, so you have to change the sound of the numbers to compensate a bit. We will start with the example counter of ko. This is used to count small things, but is also sometimes used as a general counter. So, ikko, 2個、3個、4個、5個、6個、7個、8個、9個、10個. This time the only one that changed was the first one. Rather than saying ichiko, you just said ikko. Ichi will sometimes change to this. Now I didn't say that out loud because if you remember from part 1 in this series, the small tsu adds a stutter and changes the sound after it into a double consonant. And so, ichi-ko becomes ikko. 4 and 6 also do this sometimes, but it's not as common. In total, there's probably about 500 different counters, but in everyday life you only need about 50. So I'm just gonna run really quick through the most common, and be warned, some get a little weird. I mentioned that ko is sometimes used as a general counter, but the real general counter is actually tsu, so we'll look at that next, but this one is really complicated. Hitotsu, futatsu, mitsu, yotsu, itsutsu, mutsu, nanatsu, yatsu, kokonotsu, and to. You'll eventually start to see a pattern as you learn more and more of these. Next, we're going to go into time-related counters. So starting with hours, you would say ji, ichiji, niji, sanji, yonji, goji, rokuji, shichiji, hachiji, kuji, and juji. And for minutes, you would say fun, ippun, nifun, sanpun, yonpun, gofun, roppun, nanafun, happun, kyufun, juppun. But if you wanted to say a duration of time, you would add kan to the end of ji, so ichijikan, nijikan, etc. For counting people, you would say nin, except for the first two. They kind of do whatever they want. Hitori, futari. Wait a fun, this sounds familiar. Hitori, futari, sannin, yonin, gonin, rokunin, shichinin or nananin, hachinin, kunin or kyunin, and junin. I think that's enough for now. Like I said, there's over 500 of these counters, so I'll have to do a separate lesson just for that. But this should definitely be enough to get you started. But before we go, now that you know how to count to 10 in many different ways, it's really easy to jumpstart you to being able to count to 1 trillion and beyond. First of all, in Japanese, there's no special 11 numbers like there are in English. If you want to say 11, you just say 10, 1. If you want to say 31, you say 3, 10, 1. It's really that simple. So right now you only know 1 through 10. So that means you can count to 99. Q, Ju, Q. 9, 10, 9. 9 tens and a 9. To move past this, you need to know how to say 100, which is hyaku. Now, for example, if you wanted to say 857, it would be 857. 8 100s, 5 10s, and a 7. Now to move on, you need to know how to say 1,000, which would be sen. So for example, 3,604. Sanzen ropyaku-yon. 3,000s, 6 100s, and a 4. After that would be 10,000, which is man. Now if you've been to or live in Japan, you know that an ichiman is the largest bill in the Japanese currency. It's about equivalent to $100. Basically, you can remove 2 zeros from the price of anything, and that's about how much US dollars it is. So, somebody asks you how much your coat costs, and it costs 12,000 yen, which is about $120. Would be ichiman ni sen. 1 10,000 and 2 thousands. Here's where we have a small hiccup. In Japanese, the comma, or rather the number break, happens after the 10,000 rather than the 1,000 mark. What I mean by that is that in English, after 1,000, you have 10,000 and then 100,000. But in Japanese, after ichiman, you have juman, meaning 10 10,000s or 100,000 in English. If you're having trouble with this, please don't feel bad. This is very difficult to get used to, especially if you're trying to convert the numbers and currency at the same time. So, moving on with our numbers, the highest you can go now would be like kyusenman, meaning 90 million. To get past the next roadblock, you need the number oku, meaning 100 million. With this, you can go all the way up to kyusen oku, which is 900 billion. And finally, we have chou, which means a trillion. Okay, I think we can stop there, because once you get up to kyusen chou, you're up to quintillion. I don't think you're gonna need numbers with more than 18 zeros. And with that, I'll see you next time for a sentence marathon of nouns. Happy counting! Ja ne!